I am holding a new book in my hand. It is titled The Client's Guide to Therapy: How to Get the Most Out of Your Counseling Experience. And we are going to be talking about this today with the author, Dr. Terri Watson, who is a board-certified clinical psychologist who is dedicated to helping people grow through therapy, supervision, and personal faith journeys. She is a professor at Wheaton College and has a private practice in Illinois. And she mentors emerging therapists, consults with organizations, and investigates questions that connect soul and science. So you know we are all about that here. Dr. Watson approaches her work with heart, insight, and curiosity, focusing on meaningful change. We are so honored to have Dr. Watson with us today as she talks to us about why we might want to do counseling, about what we can expect if we've never done it before, about why we might want to re-enter the counseling room if we have done it in the past and are wondering, I'm feeling new feelings. So, Dr. Watson, let's start right there. These new feelings. Our listeners are women in midlife. And as you know, this is a time of great change, of great pressure points, of fear, maybe of hope. But what do you see at this point in a woman's journey that is unique? And how do you think counseling can provide women a safe place to explore these feelings and change?
Thank you so much for hosting me in this conversation. I'm really excited about engaging this excellent question because I do think midlife as a time of transition and change is just an ideal time to be in counseling. And you're going to hear I'm very pro-counseling. I think it can be so helpful at all of the change and transition points in our life, but especially midlife for women. When we reach midlife, it's often after a season of so much of an other focus that there might be so many questions and issues and points of suffering that have been unexplored in our care for others. And so I think it's just an ideal time to find that safe space, to have someone who can kind of help do a mental health checkup. You know, what are those areas of concern? What are the questions that have remained unanswered about ourselves, our relationship with God, our relationships with significant others? And how can we think about what's ahead for us, of what God has in store and what might be new values and new priorities?
So, Terri, if someone has seen a counselor before and they think I should be moved on from those things, I should have healed already from that. But then maybe there's old things surfacing and some new things on top of that. Should they go back to the same counselor? Should they seek out a new counselor? What should be their way forward?
It's a really interesting question to explore. And I do think that psychotherapy is something that is used best if we revisit it at different points in our life. So I don't know that we ever graduate. At least I have not yet graduated from my own mental health journey. And so it's very common, especially at points of transition or difficulty, to have old issues resurface in similar ways and maybe new ways. And I think there's a part of us that says, oh, here comes that issue again. You know, I recognize that old friend. And so to have an opportunity then to re-engage with those issues in maybe a new way, maybe a deeper way. And there's a benefit to seeing a counselor you've seen before. I've been practicing for almost 40 years now, and I have people I have seen, some people I even saw when they were children, who have come back during different stages when they have their own children, or you know, when they are in that midlife stage. And so there's benefit, I think. I know their story. We sit down together in my office, and I feel like we can pick up right where we left off. There's that strong relational connection. However, there can be benefit in seeing someone new who maybe has a different approach, a different emphasis. If, for example, you saw someone that was more of a cognitive behavioral therapist that really helped you work on your thinking, your thoughts, maybe seeing a therapist that's a little more emotion focused, or someone who focuses on relationships and family systems could bring a new perspective on old problems. Discerning that with maybe friends, a spiritual advisor, should I go back to my previous counselor? Should I see someone new is a really important question. And there really isn't a right or wrong answer to that.
I also see that a lot of people, when they look up counselors, I mean, it's hard to find one. I will just say, I mean, there's a lot of people that are full because we're in a mental health crisis, but also because a lot of their descriptions list a whole bunch of things in their descriptions, like they specialize in this, this, and this. And I think a lot of women think, well, I'm not in any of those categories. So is this really for me? That my problems don't seem valid enough, so to speak, to go to this therapist because they specialize in all of these things that seem a little more extreme, and I don't fall in that category. What are your thoughts around that?
I think it's still worth a conversation with a therapist. And, as I mentioned earlier, I think we all can benefit from kind of a mental health checkup of seeing someone who can ask good questions about how we're doing, how we're coping, how are our relationships, and even how's our faith journey. Sometimes seeing someone that can do that good assessment could help us identify, are there points of pain? Are there areas where change is really needed? Are there relationships that really need some attention? I think it's so hard to have an accurate view of ourselves, right? And we call them blind spots for a reason. And so we may not see the issues that are there. I think as women, it's easy to talk ourselves out of getting the resources that we need, right? And focusing on others. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. But I think it's a good place to start, maybe even just to ask the question, do I need counseling right now? And how would it help me? And that could be a place to start with a therapist, even in a phone call where we're exploring, is this therapist a good fit?
So can we focus on that question for a second? Do I need a counselor right now? What would be some indicators to a woman that the answer would be yes, a counselor would be helpful? What are some things she could check in herself that would indicate, okay, maybe I do need to go find someone?
It's common and normal to have mental health symptoms, to have some depression and anxiety, some fears. But if after a couple weeks of those symptoms, they don't get better, if we talk to friends, use our coping resources, but they seem to get worse or they're not going away, or we find that our symptoms are really interfering with our day-to-day life, our ability to work, our ability to learn, our ability to serve our communities, then I think that's a sign that there might be mental health symptoms that need some attention. And so if a symptom is prolonged, if it intensifies, some examples would be disruptions of mood, of sleeping, of eating, relational disruptions, disruption from past memories of difficult or traumatic experiences, and certainly any thoughts of self-harm or harming others needs immediate attention. For that, of course, you wouldn't wait to talk to a therapist, but you would go to your emergency room and get an evaluation if you were having thoughts of self-harm or harming others. But I think any symptoms that intensify and linger in severity and interfere with our ability to function need to be checked out.
Okay, so let's say that someone's like, yep, I'm in. This thing keeps coming up over and over and over again, which means, and that, like, I'm a life coach, and that is actually when we refer to a counselor. When I see something in my sessions where someone brings something up over and over and over again, and I can tell they're not healed from it, I actually will refer them out to a counselor. That's like an indicator for me that they need to
Great.
go back to the counselor. But let's say that, okay, someone's decided, yep, I'm in. I'm headed in this direction. They contact counselors. And I will just say, from my own experience, both in trying to find a therapist for me and also for one of my children that wait lists are, you think getting on a wait list, you're going to be on it forever, but often you don't know. And it's quite interesting. Like God just works it out. So if someone
Yes.
has a wait list, that's okay. Like get on the wait list and you may
Yes.
come up sooner than later. So Terri, how do people, when they get there, how does someone, I mean, you've practiced for so many years. How does one make the most of their counseling experience? What does that look like?
I really think it's quite different from a visit to a physician's office, for example, where there is an assessment, a diagnosis, a prescription, often a 1 or 2 session, and there's a clear treatment plan. But I think a good counseling experience, probably a lot like coaching, is something that as therapists, we really co-create with our clients. And so the first part of psychotherapy is really getting to know the client, establishing that relationship, understanding the client's unique characteristics, their culture, their faith, their values, what's important to them, and then together coming up with a treatment plan. And the client's involvement is critical to that. And so part of my hope in writing this book is to really empower clients to make the counseling experience their own. Because as clients, we are the ones in the room, right? We need to make that experience our own, and we can be empowered and active as a participant in our counseling growth experience. So things like preparation, thinking about what we're going to talk about as clients, maybe even coming in with a list. I encourage my clients to journal ahead of time about what they most want to talk about, where they most feel stuck in their life. I think being able to be fully present in that hour, whether it's in person or on telehealth, trying to remove distractions, being aware of God's presence in the therapy room. I believe God is active and present in the healing process. And then I think probably open and vulnerable disclosure would be really key to successful participation. Sometimes we'll tell clients, talk about those very things that you most don't want to talk about. So when you come in, where is that place that feels so hard to face, that can feel shameful or difficult? And that may be the very thing that you need to talk about. And then I think many clients benefit from between session activities like homework, or I mentioned journaling, or spiritual practices that can really increase the power of that therapy hour. So if a client feels like, hey, I don't know that I'm really making progress, I'm not seeing change fast enough, we'll come up with a really good plan for some things they can do between session that can really increase their participation in the growth process.
You know, one of the things you just talked about there, which I'd like to draw out a little more, is vulnerability in the counseling sessions. I know for me, I have to fight wanting like a relationship with my counselor and wanting them to feel a certain way about me. And
Yes.
so that would mean that I don't get really honest with some of my worst thoughts, revealing those places that I need to really work through, because I don't want the counselor thinking that I'm not a godly person. It's just something I have fought myself. How do you encourage someone pushing through that? Because it is a real dynamic, I think, for myself, but also for a lot of people.
Yes. And I do think that we tend to repeat relational patterns in therapy that are familiar in other places of our life. That is normal and to be expected. And the wise therapist will notice that, gently bring it to our attention, and we can see patterns of avoidance or kind of a hesitance to be vulnerable. I remember in my own therapy really wanting to be tough and stoic and not be a burden to my therapist, which is kind of crazy, right? That's part of her job. But I recognized that was a relational pattern I was repeating. And so once we kind of decoded that, that was just a powerful moment. Because not only did I do that with her, but I did that with everybody else in my life too. And so then learning how to relate differently and try out more vulnerability. Sometimes it can feel like an experiment in therapy. Being in a different way with our therapist can help us be that more authentic, genuine person with others in our life too. So I think recognizing where we're getting stuck, how it's a relational pattern, and then with a therapist's help, we can really break through that to a different kind of relating where we can share those more vulnerable things.
That's really insightful. I want you to be my therapist, Terri. Yes. So it gets a little bit to expectations. So say somebody maybe has done therapy before or has not, but they're coming in with some expectations of what the end result is going to be. Can
Yes.
you talk about what is a realistic and healthy expectation a woman might have when starting with working with a therapist?
Yes. Well, as I mentioned, it's really different than other kinds of medical care in that it's usually not a quick fix, but it doesn't have to be years and years. Research found that clients show a significant decrease in symptoms after just 8 sessions, even more significant decrease after about 20. But many people choose to stay in therapy longer for lasting change. So it's not a quick fix, but it's not forever, is an important thing to note about therapy. I think I would also emphasize that there is a balance in therapy between interventions that promote change, that help us change unhealthy patterns of thinking, behaving, and feeling, and acceptance that there are some things about this fallen world, there's some things about our own personalities, maybe about our situation that just aren't going to change in significant ways. And so sometimes therapy can also promote acceptance of those things about ourselves and our life that aren't going to change. For example, I can help a client really experience some change and healing from traumas in their life, but they will probably always remember those traumatic moments. They won't have the same negative impact on their lives. So accepting that that is a part of kind of the tapestry of their life, and maybe even seeing ways that God will use that, might be part of the therapy work of making meaning from suffering, can be part of that acceptance work. So balancing acceptance and change. A couple other things I would just mention briefly about expectations is I think some people assume there's going to be lots of advice giving. And I think a good therapist doesn't give a lot of advice. That's just my own opinion because I don't know a client's exact life and circumstances. And so I really want to help them come to their own convictions and their own direction. And I have ways I can help them do that and look at options and evaluate. But in terms of direct advice, do this, do that, I think that's not something that generally happens a lot in therapy. And then sometimes clients come in and they think talking about other people and how other people need to change can be a focus of therapy. And that never works, right? We can't change significant others in our own therapy. So figuring out a way to sort of gently shift the focus back to how can I help my clients live with those challenging people and how do they need to change is more of the focus.
How do you know, Terri, when something's not working? I know just from my own experience and even in the coaching world, like not all coaches are equal. And there's some that are much better than others. And that's just the way it is. So how do you know if maybe you've landed in a seat that it's not a good one for you?
It's a great question, Krista. And I would say that the relationship is so essential to effective psychotherapy as it is to coaching, right? Being able to establish trust. The client needs to feel understood, like I can put themselves in their shoes and understand their experiences. And sometimes that trust, that connection, for whatever reason, just doesn't happen. And so that would be a reason for a client to consider another therapist if they just don't feel safe. They don't feel like they can trust or feel understood by a therapist. If you've been in therapy for a while and you're not experiencing any change, you bring it up to your therapist and they don't really engage with that. Maybe they're defensive. That would be a reason to think about another therapist, giving it some time, and again, bringing up areas of concern to see if those can be worked through is really important, especially if we're repeating patterns of mistrust. That's going to happen with any therapist. We might want to give it some time. And certainly if a therapist is unethical, talks about themselves too much, boundary violations, or any kind of discrimination, it would be time to find a different therapist.
That's helpful.
Mhm.
Also, what about virtual versus in person? Do you
Mm,
have thoughts around that?
I do, yes. All of us quickly learned how to do virtual therapy right during COVID. Didn't do a lot of virtual therapy at that point, but when I was unable to see my clients in office, did couple, family, individual therapy online, and I was pleasantly surprised by how effective it was with most clients. I've carefully looked at the research on this, and for most client issues, telehealth works just as well as in person, but there are some exceptions. And I think I personally prefer in person just because I think the power of presence, of being present with others in a physical space, being present with God in a room together, has just sort of an intangible benefit. And we know from research that it can really help clients who are especially in distress and may need a therapist presence to help with emotional regulation. If you're doing a lot of role play, that can help. I think I missed some nonverbals on telehealth, especially if I'm working with a couple and looking at their interaction. So I do think there's things that are missed, and there is some research that suggests that for some clients and therapists, it's harder to establish that strong trust and connection doing virtual therapy. I think for most people it works well, but some clients may know they really need and want that in person. And I like to support that whenever possible.
Mhm. You mentioned working with couples, and I think during midlife is a transition point for a lot of
Yes.
couples who have been married a long time, and because family life is changing, but also both husband and wife are going through their own individual changes at this stage in life. What are some of the key indicators that counseling might be helpful for a married couple in midlife?
I would say my first answer would be that I think counseling would always be helpful for a couple in midlife. Boy, that's just such a transition time. And again, transitioning to different relationships with parents, with children, it'd be a great time to kind of reevaluate how are things in our relationship. Sometimes it takes somebody else to ask those hard questions. And just for a couple to have kind of a relational checkup. How are we doing? Are there things that you've always hoped would be a part of our marriage that aren't happening?
Mhm.
What are the things that are going well? Even if it's just a session or two. And I think there are many great programs offered through churches, through community organizations that help couples do this kind of a couple checkup as part of a retreat. But I think if a couple is starting to experience more conflict, more tension, more distance, if other relationships are becoming more significant, if either one recognizes experiences of attraction towards someone else, for example, those would all be warning signs that it's really important to see someone together. And I think there can be benefits to even a psychotherapy that focuses on individual growth, having one spouse present for that. I have some couples I work with where I'll take turns working with each of them individually, and we'll do a little bit more individual focused work, but then I'll bring in the spouse and say, well, what do you think about this? What do you notice? How does this individual dynamic affect your marriage? And so they can watch the change happen with each other. And that can be really powerful. And it can create a sense of empathy for some of those ongoing marital challenges that may feel like annoyances, because we begin to see, oh, so that's where that comes from in my partner's family of origin. And I can have a little more empathy and a little less judgment towards that.
So we talked about before we started recording that you could walk us through an experience. Can
Yes.
we do that now?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
So one intervention I use with clients quite a bit who are struggling with feelings of safety, maybe struggling with feeling grounded and connected with their body, needing to sort of emotionally regulate, is a guided visualization that allows them to create a safe space, to visualize a safe space that they can bring up, that they can go to anytime they're feeling under stress. So can I walk you through that visualization?
Please.
Yes.
I really like for clients of faith who want to integrate their Christian faith with counseling to bring in a faith component. So I'll do that as well with this visualization. So before we start, let's do like a mini assessment of kind of where each of you are right now in your own stress. And we'll see if this visualization helps. So if you think of a scale from 0 to 10, if 10 is pretty stressed, feeling tension in your body, and 0 is completely calm, no stress at all, see if you could find a number that kind of represents where you are right now. And just kind of note that to yourself, scale of 0 to 10. Okay, got it? Great. Well, what I'd like you to do now is close your eyes and see if you could bring to mind a picture of a very peaceful, safe place. Take a few deep breaths as you do this, just some inhaling and then exhale. And just let your mind go to a place that represents peace, safety, and calm for you. And really see if you can picture it with lots of detail. It could be an Adirondack chair on a lakeshore, or a clearing in a forest, or a beach, or maybe even your own backyard. You can really picture that. And again, as you're doing some deep breathing, can I ask you both to just briefly describe the safe place you're coming up with?
Sure. I was thinking of a clearing in a forest, but only a forest on one side of me. So it's almost like a field coming up to the forest.
Great, like an open space with trees then around the clearing. Great.
Yeah, I was picturing myself at a camp that I love, Camp Spalding, and out on this patio that overlooks the lake, and it has this little island in front of it. And I was picturing the trees and the rock on the island and the little bridge that goes out to it, and just the presence of God that I feel when I'm there.
Beautiful. Well, let's have you go ahead and go back to those places for a minute. And again, some deep breaths. You're both really good at this visualization. Sometimes it can be hard for clients to come up with that picture, and it can take a little while, and that's fine. But see if you can really use all of your senses to imagine not only the sights, the visual, but what does it feel like to be there? Can you feel grass under your feet, or sun on your face, or the wind blowing? Just take some deep breaths. See if you can just have that sensory imagination. Do you hear any sounds around you as you're in that safe, calm place? And is there anyone you want there with you? Krista, you brought Jesus into that moment. So if you want to be in God's presence in that safe, calm place right now, just imagine God there with you in that place. Where is God in that place? How is God interacting with you in that place? Take a few deep breaths and just enjoy the moment and just the feeling of calm, safety, security. a word or a phrase that really captures this space for you. Just think of a word or phrase that comes to mind. And in the future, whenever you're stressed, whenever you need to be in that safe, calm place, you can just remember that word or phrase, and that'll bring this picture up for you, and you can be there again. Open your eyes. And I would love to hear your word or phrase that you came up with, if you feel comfortable sharing.
Sure. My word was refreshing.
Oh,
I was thinking of the crisp air, feeling the air. I think it's my Pacific Northwest roots. Wants to feel the moisture in the air. And it's not too hot, but also God's refreshment, that He will give me what I need to have energy and to feel refreshed.
oh, I love that.
Yeah, mine was living water. Thinking of just God's presence and how it just washes through me and fills every part of me. And there's also water, on the property and the camp in particular. I just see God's living water working through all of the campers that come and through me and, anyone who really goes there and experiences really incredible. They set it up in such a way that people have the space for God to meet them. And so just the living water.
Beautiful. Oh, sounds like a very holy space.
Mm-hmm.
God's presence and ministry. Oh, love that. You both did so well with this. How would you rate yourself on that stress scale now? From 0 to 10, what number would you come up with now? And was there any difference?
Mm-hmm.
Did that visualization help reduce your stress in the moment?
In this interview, in general, when you asked, how stressed are you? Rate yourself. Of course, I had to ask myself, does she mean like big life stress or right in this moment stress?
Yes.
So I chose to go with right in this moment. And I was not feeling very stressed because I'm loving this conversation. So I put myself at about a 5. And I would say I'm at about a 3 now.
Great.
Yeah, I'm post-surgery, so I've got a lot of stress in my life right now,
Yes,
and
can
pain,
imagine.
physical pain. And so I'm at like a 7 or 8, actually, pretty high stress right now with some various things going on. And I think that visualization, maybe I'm down to like a 6, but I think what it did for me is it reminded me to trust God's living water that has met me in the past and will meet me now. So I think for me, I don't know that I could put a stress necessarily correlated, but it just really reminded me of a truth that I need to hang on to in this season.
Wonderful. And I think that for many clients, they may need to practice this. For me, I know needing to practice this again and again so that when we think of those keywords or phrases, that it can really help our body slow down and calm down. So it may not happen the first time for us, but both of you were able to move the notch a little bit on calming your bodies down. I did too. I was just aware of also just feeling a little calmer through walking you through this exercise. I had my own safe, calm space that I go to on the beach, even as I was walking you through this exercise. So for clients to practice this over and over again, I listened to your wonderful podcast on courage. And I love how you described courage as a muscle that we exercise and develop. And I think the same is true of coping with stress and tension in our lives, that is a coping skill, kind of like a muscle, that the first time we try a new technique might be difficult, but as we exercise that over and over again, it's something that can become very routine and really help us be present to ourselves and God in the moment.
I think it's so helpful to use different modalities than we tend to use in our daily lives that we don't often take time for visualization and I'm a coach and I know about this stuff and I still don't take time for it, So
Yes.
it's so good to enter into different ways of accessing those parts of us that are in those deep places. And I'm doing something, I'm getting trained in something called soul collage. Have you heard of it before?
You know, I have heard of it, but I don't know much about it.
It's more of like a artistic way, it's accessing kind of those deeper
Mhm.
places visually. And, just any modality, I think, that gets us outside of what we normally do to access feelings, emotions, those places that maybe aren't quite healed yet. It's so helpful to do that.
Absolutely. And there are things that are just kind of beyond words,
Mhm.
right? That are expressed through art, through music,
Mhm.
through prayer. And if we can
Mhm.
help people access that through coaching, through therapy, how helpful that can be. Mhm.
Mhm. Well, what would you say, Terry, are your final words as we close today?
I would say that for most of us, the question isn't if, but when I should do therapy, that we know that most adults will experience significant mental health symptoms at some point in our lives. And as you said, we're in a mental health crisis right now with the impacts of the pandemic. And when that happens, counseling is a powerful tool that can help us address the very real mental health needs, relational needs, and even help us grow in our relationship with God and address some of the deep spiritual questions that get stirred up through suffering. And suffering is ubiquitous. We will all encounter experiences of suffering, and we don't have to navigate them alone. A skilled therapist can be a wonderful companion for helping not only alleviate suffering, but help us make meaning of those very difficult experiences in our life so that suffering can produce endurance and produce character and produce hope, as Romans remind us, and it is a hope that will not disappoint. I think hope is foundational to all counseling, that we enter counseling because there's a hope that there can be change. And I do think it's a very courageous act for us to pick up the phone and call a counselor, but would really encourage people not to hesitate to do that. As you said, Krista, if you end up on a waiting list or it's hard to find someone, persevere, ask for help, ask for recommendations through your healthcare provider, through trusted leaders in your community, through maybe even your employer or your insurance company, and persevere in finding a good therapist. Interview a few on the phone until you find someone where there is that good relational connection.
Well, and one thing we haven't talked about, but I would like you to speak to briefly, is finding a Christian therapist versus a different kind of therapist. Can you just
Yes.
speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I do think that finding a therapist where there is a match with some of our most closely held values and commitments, whether it's our faith commitments, whether it's our ethnic or racial identity, and finding a counselor that can really understand that is very important. So there are many counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, marriage and family therapists who actively integrate their Christian faith with their practice of counseling. So I know some clients may worry, is counseling going to be harmful to my spiritual life or replace spiritual practices? But a Christian counselor can really help integrate faith practices and a deep understanding of God's work in our lives with the counseling process. Now, all licensed psychotherapists are committed to ethical practice that involves deeply respecting clients' value commitments. So it is also okay to see someone who may not share our faith commitments, but then it's more up to us as the client to bring that into the counseling process. And a good counselor is going to respect those values, even though they don't actively share them. But it's really okay when you're interviewing therapists on the phone to ask about that. What is your approach to therapy? To say, I'm a Christian and I really want my faith to be a part of our counseling process. How would you help me with that? And ask directly about that while interviewing therapists.
Thank you, Terry. That's very helpful. It's
Mhm.
really, really helpful. Just so appreciate you, and we wish you the best in all of you and all that you're doing to bring good and hope to the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a really wonderful conversation, and may God richly bless your work as well.
Well, thank you.